On today's episode, I'll be talking about The Truman Show from 1998.
If you're looking for a man with no plans or programs, and he always leaves a chance to hold hands for romance. Are you looking for the Luke with an old man, a cold hands? It's a creature of the night who heads for his spotlight. I'm here to welcome you to Brandon at Random Reviews. No method when I choose. It's Brandon at Random Reviews. Yeah.
All right, everyone, welcome to Brandon at Random Reviews, covering one unsystematically chosen topic at a time. If you like listening to a guy recap and review movies in weekly episodes, then look no further. To keep up with the newest content, you can find Brandon at Random Reviews on most major video and audio platforms, as well as all popular social media sites. If you enjoy this, please like and subscribe, and maybe drop me a nice rating on your app of choice. Really helps me out. So like I said, today's movie is The Truman Show, released on June 5th, 1998. Runtime 103 minutes. This movie is rated PG for a 90s level depiction of media overstep by the Motion Picture Association of America. Budget $60 million. Directed by Peter Weir. He also directed Master and Commander with Russell Crowe, and honestly, that movie is very well regarded. It's not like a commonly heard movie title when talking about great movies, but it is up there for me. It's very well made. It's very well done. I fucking love it. Performances, story, all that stuff are great. He also directed Witness with Harrison Ford. I talked about this one recently. It's about a guy who goes into witness protection because the kid saw, like, he witnessed a murder, and basically they go to Amish country and live, I think, if I recall correctly. He also directed Dead Poets Society, which is another great one. Honestly, I wouldn't necessarily call it underrated, but it's maybe a little underappreciated here and there. I don't know. It's very memorable, very enjoyable. For the writer, we have Andrew Nicole, who wrote Gattaca with, I think it's Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman. And actually, they ended up having a child together. I don't know if they're married or they got married ever, or if they're even still together if they did. But Maya Hawke is their daughter, I believe. And that's a neat little tidbit. She's kind of a celebrity now. She is in Stranger Things, among other things now. And he also wrote the movie In Time, which I've talked about before. It's a great premise, but it's probably something that would have been better as a TV show as opposed to a movie. For the composer, we have Bullard von Dulwitz. I didn't see anything that this guy had done for scores in movies and TV that like really jumped out at me. So I won't like go into his background filmography, whatever you want to call it. For the cast, we have Jim Carrey, who plays Truman Burbank. He was, of course, in 3 movies in the same year, 1994, and they were all pretty much smash hits and still well regarded, in my opinion, to this day. Ace Ventura probably has aged the worst because not only did it seems like it was low budget, not just that it was low budget, but that it looks low budget in a lot of ways, but also there are some things in it that are probably not something you'd put in a movie now and be able to get away with it. But I really enjoy Ace Ventura. The Mask is still very funny. It's probably his most bit-filled type movie where he's just doing one bit after another. And also Dumb and Dumber, one of my all-time favorite comedies, honestly. Like, I could pop it in anytime and fucking watch and still enjoy it, still find things funny. Then we have Ed Harris, who plays Kristoff, and he was, of course, in Snowpiercer, which I covered in a shortened video episode. It was very brief. It was one of those, like, watchable winter movie types. He was in The Rock, which I covered in my first season, or no, my second season. It was when I started doing videos, and honestly, I really enjoy The Rock. It was Michael Bay's first big movie, and it's very fucking good, actually. Like, I still really enjoy it. There's some cheesy moments and some continuity type errors, but it is what it is. And he was also in he was also in Apollo 13, which I covered recently, and he's very good in that. He plays the guy on the ground that is basically conducting all of the troubleshooting with the mission. Laura Linney plays Hannah Gill, and she was in Love Actually, which I notoriously am not a huge fan of, and her storyline is particularly depressing. I don't find it very enjoyable, but my sister loves that movie quite a bit. The only reason I like to tune into that movie ever is because I think Martine McCrutchen, I think is her name, is stunningly attractive, even though they try and call her fat the entire movie. She was also in Primal Fear, which was like a breakout role for Edward Norton. It has Richard Gere in the starring role. Edward Norton plays this guy with like multiple personalities. It's very interesting to watch. It's worth checking out if you haven't. And she was also in the movie Congo, which I don't know if it was technically a flop, but it definitely did not live up to expectations because it was heavily marketed in the 90s before it came out, and it was just not great. Noah Emmerich plays Lewis Coltrane. He was in Super 8. Don't really remember Super 8 that well, but I did see it after I had already seen Stranger Things, even though it came out before. And it did have a lot of similar elements. Like, it almost seemed like they were kind of going for the same type of thing with it. He was also in Miracle, which is about the 1980 U.S. hockey team that won the gold against Russia, which was a very symbolic victory because the Cold War was still going on. And he was also in Copland, which I haven't watched in a while, but I remember watching it for the first time. It wasn't that long ago, actually, and I really thought it was a great fucking movie. Like, I thought it was really good. I couldn't believe that it wasn't more popularly known. Harry Shearer plays Mike Michelson. I almost said Mick Michelson. Mike Michelson, which is really the worst fucking name, but it is kind of humorous because he's like a host of a TV show on this. He did a ton of voices in The Simpsons, still does as far as I know. I mean, he did, I think, Flanders and Smithers and Mr. Burns and a whole bunch of other people. But he's also one that I don't think of initially when I start to think, because I think like Hank Azaria, Dan Castellaneta, and Nancy Cartwright, among others, but he's not the first one that jumps into my mind. And he does a ton of other voice work that you probably don't even realize is him. I won't go into all of them because I don't really want to ruin it for you if you don't want to know. Paul Giamatti plays Simeon, and he was in Sideways, one of my all-time faves. I love that movie. It's about two guys going to wine country, and they're friends, and they basically are doing like a bachelor party or bachelor weekend type thing, and they just get into all sorts of hijinks, and it's not, I don't know if I would truly call it a real comedy, but it's a dramedy more like. He was also in Cinderella Man. That's one with Russell Crowe, and I think Ed Harris might also be in that one, if I'm not mistaken. I might be misremembering. I thought Cinderella Man was okay. Oh, no, wait. I'm thinking of A Beautiful Mind. I'm sorry. Not Ed Harris. I think Ed Harris is in A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe. Cinderella Man is the one about the boxer. I kind of found that movie forgettable. I didn't think it was that great, but I should probably go back and revisit before I judge too harshly. And he was also recently in a movie called The Holdovers, which honestly really fucking enjoyed Holdovers. It was a really good movie. I think Paul Giamatti is a great actor, even though he's been in some questionable roles over the years. I feel like that's all part of being an actor. I don't feel like every role has to be a home run. It's just great to see that he's still working and still doing his thing and still making great movies. And last but not least, we have Philip Baker Hall, who plays John Plachette. And honestly, I don't even know. I think it's just because he's noteworthy, but I don't even actually mention him throughout the course of the plot because he has such a minor role in this movie. It's just that I always remember him as being the guy who played Mr. Bookman, the library detective on Seinfeld early on, and that was one of the first great Seinfeld bits. He was also in Boogie Nights, and he was in Rush Hour, very small role in that movie, and he was in Seinfeld, as I mentioned. So honestly, he's fucking great. I don't think he's in enough, but I really enjoy him, and I don't know if he's still with us. I can't remember. Casting notes. Robin Williams and Gary Oldman were considered for the role of Truman. Jim Carrey took the part in hopes of being viewed as a more multifaceted actor, so that basically he would not be typecast in comedies only, people could see him as doing serious roles. Carrey was actually the director's first choice for Truman. The film started with Dennis Hopper in the role of Christoph, but he was fired after 2 days and the role was given to Ed Harris. Laurel Linney actually studied Sears catalogs from the 1950s to determine how she would do various poses and present products throughout the movie. For the plot synopsis, an insurance salesman begins to suspect that his whole life is actually some sort of reality TV show. For the tagline, on the air, unaware. Pretty solid tagline, actually. I really like that one. Alright, guys, let's just dive right into the plot of this motherfucking movie. So, this one kicks off with Ed Harris's character, Christoph, being interviewed, and he's saying that the world has grown tired of watching actors fake emotions, and he says people no longer want to see excitement fabricated by special effects. He explains that despite the world that this guy Truman lives in being somewhat counterfeit, nothing about him is fake and there are no scripts. He says that it's not always Shakespeare, but it's real, and then it cuts to Jim Carrey as Truman Burbank. Instead of the actual movie opening credits, we get credits to the show within the movie that is centered around Truman's life, and it's created by this Christoph guy. Here is one fun tidbit that I'm not sure if everybody knows, but due to collective bargaining agreements and the unions with the directors and actors, every feature film is required to have opening and closing credits. I don't think the opening credits require all of the cast and crew, but it requires most of the major players. And then the closing credits contain all the credits that you're going to get. And then when a film opts to not have opening credits for one reason or another, like here, they have to include separate credit sequences at the end of the movie to make up for it. Like they'll basically do preliminary credits that are basically just the same thing as what the intro credits would be, and they're stylized differently. And then it cuts to the actual closing credits where it just scrolls. And in order to reduce confusion very early on here, the entire premise here is that Truman is the subject of the show that he doesn't know exists and is completely fabricated in every way except for him. Christoph says that there are no scripts, but he is basically ad-libbing what would be unwritten scripting throughout the show and basically coordinating things to happen. Everyone Truman has ever met is an actor, and although the things he does are authentic, everything around him is being made up by actors and directors as his life continues on without his knowledge. Christoph is the creator of the show and basically the director, showrunner as well. Truman appears to be looking into his medicine cabinet mirror and just talking, but we see him through a camera feed that is stylized to be lower resolution looking, and it says live in the bottom corner, so we know this is a hidden camera feed that Truman doesn't know about. Truman says, "I'm not going to make it, you're going to have to go on without me," and I guess he's doing a bit of some sort or referencing something by himself for funsies. It shows an actress being interviewed named Hannah Gill, who is played by Laurel Linney, and she's explaining how she doesn't really have a distinct private or public life because her life is the Truman Show and she plays his wife Meryl on the show. It shows Noah Emmerich as Lewis Coltrane, who plays Truman's best friend Marlon on the show, and he's explaining that nothing on the show is actually fake because it's all real and it's just controlled, which, to be clear, is honestly still fake, but it's just fake to a lesser degree if you want to be a knob about it, I guess. I mean, to say that it's not fake is ridiculous to me. Then, as Truman finishes his bit in the bathroom mirror, Meryl calls him away and tells him that he's going to be late, and so he rushes off, and we see him walk outside and greet a family across the street by yelling out good morning, but then he says, "Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night." And he lets out a superficial laugh with the couple and their child across the street, and he heads for his car. He's startled before he can get into his car by a Dalmatian named Pluto, who belongs to a neighbor and jumps on Truman as the neighbor reassures him that the dog won't hurt him. But it seems like Truman is very put off by this dog for some reason, and of course it's very big, so that's not totally unreasonable, and I'm not sure we shouldn't read into that too much, but whatever, I'll get into that later. I will say, as a person who, as a child, was very fearful of dogs, people with dogs do not respect the fact that you're clearly uncomfortable around them. They always want to reassure you. It's like any fear though. They always want to reassure you that there's nothing to be concerned about. But the problem is that's fear doesn't come from a rational place. So it doesn't matter how rational you are with somebody. It's better to be cooler about it and make sure that you're keeping your dog at a distance if you can. Because when I was younger, it was like I basically got between a mother and her like newborn puppies, and I was like 1.5, 2 years old, I think, and I didn't know any better. And so the dog bit me, the mother did. And so basically, until I was like in my teens, I was fearful of dogs. And then eventually, I was a delivery driver for a pizza chain, and people really don't respect that the delivery driver might be afraid of dogs. So I basically had to become cool with dogs. And then I started to really like dogs, and I dated a girl who was like obsessed with them. So I really got acclimated, and I'm good with dogs now. Then suddenly, as Truman is trying to get into his car, some sort of device that is maybe the size of like a KitchenAid mixer just falls out of the sky and lands on the street in front of Truman's house, and the glass on the device shatters. So Truman goes out to investigate it, and he looks up in confusion at the sky, but we don't really get to see any more of his investigation. And next thing you know, he's just in his car driving, and he's listening to what you can probably assume is a news broadcast that is immediately explaining that the device that fell on the ground was from an aircraft that was in trouble and began shedding parts, even though we as viewers know it was more likely some kind of device used for the show. But it's also weird because the news broadcaster on the radio seemingly asks Truman a question directly about whether or not he's planning to fly soon, and Truman says no to him, and the guy on the radio laughs and responds directly to him, like, oh, well, that's good, kind of thing. And although not all of this movie is actually seen from these concealed cameras, a large portion of it is shown briefly to reveal how in depth the production of the TV show is in a stylized way. It's like you're seeing it mostly as a regular movie, but they show these little glimpses of how these hidden cameras are all around and what the home audience is seeing on this show. As Truman is walking around town later, it seems like virtually everybody knows him and greets him very actively, more than anyone would actually in a normal place. It's revealed that he's some kind of insurance salesman and he sits at a desk at work, but after a moment, he turns around and secretly picks up a phone and makes a call and quietly asks to be connected to someone in Fiji, and a coworker immediately appears, clearly deliberately intervening to disrupt this call on purpose, and asks him if he saw the front page of a newspaper, the newspaper, I should say, I guess. And it says that the island town where they live, which is called Sea Haven, was voted the best place on earth, and the coworker gives a distraught look as he slowly disappears again, and Truman continues this call trying to get to Fiji. He asks the operator if there are any listings for Lauren Garland, and when they say no, he asks if maybe there's a listing for Sylvia Garland, but he has no luck with that either. He thanks them and hangs up the phone, and he pulls a copy of Elle magazine out from under a stack of work documents and tears a picture of a model's eyes in close-up from it. Elle is a weekly French lifestyle magazine that features a mixture of fashion, beauty, and general lifestyle content. Elle is French for she or her, and the publication was established in 1945 in Paris in the immediate aftermath of World War II and after women in France gained the right to vote in 1944. So Truman rips this image out of the magazine, and he tries to do so in a subtle way by coughing as he makes the rips, but the eyes in the picture are clearly somehow significant to him, but we don't really know how. A different coworker comes and tells him that he has a sale to close in Wells Park, and Truman makes up an obvious lie of an excuse as to why he can't go, but it's not clear why he would be averse to doing it. And the coworker stresses the importance of meeting his sales quotas because the company is making cuts at the end of the month. So Truman reluctantly agrees to take the short trip to Wells Park, which is across the bay from Sea Haven, and the coworker declares that a little sea air might do him some good. He goes to the harbor and gets a ticket to board a ferry to Wells Park, but he's very clearly apprehensive, and he looks down in the water and sees a small sunken boat beneath the surface, and he's visibly unsettled by the sight. And to be clear, we don't actually know if Truman is really seeing this boat or if he's just maybe imagining the boat is there. One of the men on board the ferry that Truman was originally headed for asks him if everything's okay, and Truman is dismissive and doesn't call attention to whatever concern he seems to have. And the score gets noticeably darker, and Truman just walks away and doesn't get on the ferry at all, and it's very unsettling. Like, you just know something is wrong. It cuts to him back at his house working in the garden as Meryl returns home and greets him. Like I said, Meryl is his wife. She reveals to him that she got something for free at the store and pulls out some kind of knife in a package called a chef's pal, which she claims is a dicer, slicer, and peeler in one. And she proceeds to do what appears to be a scripted advertisement for the product and tries to pass it off as a normal conversation. And Truman just says, "Wow, that's amazing." But you can tell that he even finds it a little strange too. They keep showing shots of the town, and it's very densely covered in what appear to be houses with very little space in between them. That night, Truman is hanging out with his friends, or his friend Marlin, who also does some not so subtle advertising of the beer that he's drinking. And the two of them are parked with their headlights on and they're hitting golf balls down what I guess is a bridge or a pier of some sort, but you can't really tell where it leads to, but there's nobody on it. So I don't know if that makes any sense to you. Like, it's probably a bridge, but it seems like even at night there would be people on this bridge, and there isn't. Truman mentions to Marlin that he's thinking about leaving his job and possibly Sea Haven altogether as well, but Marlin reacts in obvious disbelief because he thinks that Truman has a desirable career because he has a desk job, and Marlin only stocks vending machines. Truman reveals to Marlin that he would like to go to Fiji, but Marlin claims that he doesn't even know where Fiji is, so Truman uses a golf ball as a visual aid of a globe to show him. Truman is clearly fascinated by the nation and explains that there are islands there where humans still have never set foot. And for those who don't know, Fiji is an island nation in the continent of Oceania. I don't know if it's Oceania. It's what used to be called the continent of Australia, but to differentiate from Australia, the country, they named it Oceania. I don't know when that happened exactly. But it consists of 330 islands, 110 of which are inhabited with a human population, and the country is roughly 1,100 nautical miles northeast of New Zealand. The majority of the country's islands were formed by volcanic activity around 150 million years ago. Marlin exhibits a lot of uncertainty regarding Truman's thoughts on wanting to leave for obvious reasons, but he still asks him when he actually intends to go. And then Truman explains that he can't just drop everything, obviously, and go because there are a lot of things to consider and plan for before he could actually leave, but he assures him he'll inevitably go and do it. Then it shows Truman alone on a beach while it's still nighttime, and he only has the light from a lighthouse nearby to see out toward the water, and he seemingly has a flashback to when he was a kid in a sailboat with his father during a storm, and the choppy water causes his father to fall out of the boat and die when Truman couldn't pull him back out of the water to safety. And I mean, Truman must be, he under 10 at least, like probably like 6, I think they might say later. So that might actually be why Truman was so reluctant about boarding the ferry that day. Back in the present, in yet another bizarre occurrence, it starts raining on Truman. He's still on the beach, but the rainfall is only coming down in the immediate area surrounding him initially. And when he moves out of the stream of water temporarily, it follows him back and forth as he moves around before the rain finally starts to downpour everywhere around him. But it's very clear that he realizes there's something unusual and suspicious going on, and he slowly makes his way off the beach. When he gets home, Meryl acts annoyed that he's completely soaked, but he immediately launches into his thought that he has $8,000 that they could use to go on a trip and that it would last them a long time if they traveled the world for a while just using that. She's quick to point out that he's acting like a teenager, and she says that they have a life there and they had their mortgage and car payments to make and they can't just up and leave like that. He explains that he just wants an adventure and to see the world, and she says that she thought that they were going to try for a baby, and she thinks that that should be adventurous enough for him because clearly that's totally the same thing. thing in every way. I mean, going on some kind of vacation for however long versus having a child that you take care of until it's old enough to be on its own, totally the same kind of adventure. But he says that the baby idea could wait, and he's antsy to get out of Sea Haven right now because he wants to be an explorer, but she tells him that the feeling will pass. Then she deflects by suggesting they could get intimate with each other, and it shows two viewers of the show. They're like guards in a guard shack. You know, you don't know where they're working, but they're guards, like security guards. And they're watching these events unfold on the show, and one of them explains that you never see anything when these two get intimate, meaning that whenever the two of them are about to have sex, the production of the show has a way of obviously not showing anything that's happening because this is presumably on a channel. I mean, if it's not HBO type, they can't show nudity or anything. I'm going to point this out now because I don't remember if they actually get into it because I've only seen this movie once before this viewing and I don't really recall, but I can't even fathom how expensive and difficult to coordinate this entire show would actually be if it were attempted in real life. It's just not clear how much of the world would be staffed up so that various people could be anywhere that Truman might just show up. Obviously, the regular workday stuff would be pretty easy to coordinate, but I can't tell you how many times I have randomly decided to hop in the car and run to the store or get food late at night, especially like when I was in college or things like that. So not only would there have to be employees at any stores or restaurants I might go to, but there would also obviously have to be a realistic amount of traffic on the roads and whatnot. And I'm sure, given that the assertion here is that Truman has never known any different, they could probably use that to their advantage a lot of the time. Like, there are just things that would seem off to a person who had lived in the real world before that might not seem as off to Truman. It would just seem normal, probably. For instance, they could get away with not having any 24-hour places and just establish that from the beginning that that's how it is there. You know, I mean, there are places all over this country, even though there used to be 24-hour places all over. There were still places that they didn't necessarily do that, I think. But we're supposed to believe he's living inside of the most elaborate and massive dome that simulates weather and has somehow made it this long before starting to pick up on something being off. Like, he hasn't noticed stuff until he's like clearly like in his 30s, you know? All the while, this whole production is supposedly profitable and sustainable on a show that is supposedly broadcasting 24/7 based on ad revenue. I know, it's a fucking movie. I'm just pointing these things out. After Truman and Meryl bang it out that night, we see yet another monotonous day for Truman where he stops at a newsstand and greets a ton of people along the way. But as he has yet another awkward interaction with a dog, and I originally thought the assertion here is that Truman smells different from all of them, like all of these other people, because he's the only one that has always lived in this place, so he wouldn't have other outside scents. So these dogs, like, that was what I was theorizing before I put together why he's got that we find out later, because I was so wrong about that. Suddenly, Truman crosses paths with a strange man on the street, and he looks at the man and says, "Dad?" And it's clearly the actor who played his dad when he was younger that supposedly died falling off that boat. But suddenly a mysterious swarm of people that have like numbers on their backs, as if they were like running a marathon, but they're in plain clothes. They just storm in and take this dad actor away without a word, and they quickly load the guy on a bus and close the door before Truman can get to him. The bus pulls away and Truman tries to get them to stop, but the bus just keeps going, and no one even really acknowledges Truman in this moment. He goes to see his mother, and she tells him it's not crazy that he claims to have seen his father because she feels like she imagines she sees him all the time too. But Truman asserts that what he saw was extremely different from what she's talking about, and he explains that it was his actual dad, and he was dressed like a homeless guy, and the people came out of nowhere and just took him away and didn't say anything. And his mother deflects by saying it's about time they cleaned up the trash downtown, and she points out that his father was an only child, so it couldn't have been a brother of his father or something. She explains to him that it's likely he still feels guilty for what happened to his father, even though she claims that she's never blamed him. It shows Truman in his basement unlocking a combination lock and rifling through a chest of some sort. It has old items and he's looking through pictures from his childhood, but when he hears Meryl coming down, he quickly switches to pretending like he's doing something else, and she asks him what he's up to, and he explains that he's just fixing the mower, and she says that he saw and he says that he saw his father today, but she already knows that because his mother called her and told her, and she explains that he shouldn't upset her like that, but he doesn't understand what she expected him to do because he didn't just do it to like get a rise out of his mother or something. He really knows he saw his father, and then she just says that she only came down to tell him that she made food, but he says he's not really hungry. Then she says that he should throw out that old mower and get one of those elk rotaries, another fucking forced advertisement. And it's weird because, like I said, I don't remember that much of this movie, but I thought that there was a little bit more buildup of seeing his normal life before things start getting weird. But it really did kick in pretty quick with that, like, device falling on the street and all that. Like, it really kicked it off pretty quickly. It wasn't like he was living in a life of delusion for very long. When Meryl leaves the basement and Truman returns to rifling through the old stuff, he finds something that looks like a sweater, or at least part of one, and it cuts to a couple of female viewers who are watching. One of them points out that the producers of the show could never eliminate her, or at least they could eliminate her, but they couldn't eliminate Truman's memory of her. When the other viewer asks who she means, we see a flashback to Truman in high school. And I love when they do this thing in movies with flashbacks where the actor is portraying their younger self and they're way too young to play as young as they're playing. Or they're way too old. Did I say old or young? I don't know. They're way too old to be playing somebody that young. And it seems like all they really do is make them look younger by giving them a more youthful haircut, usually with their hair hanging down more in front for some reason. I don't know why that's like immediately supposed to look more youthful. The first thing I think of when I try and think of an example of this is Christian Bale in Batman Begins, because he's supposed to be in college, but I think Christian Bale was probably at least in his 30s at that point, and he just doesn't look that young, but they do the same thing with his hair in that movie. So Truman is in the marching band, and this is, like I said, it's when he's in high school, it's a flashback, and he looks over and sees this girl sitting by a tree, and the two of them make eye contact with each other, and it seems like they're both interested in one another. The woman is played by actress Natasha McElhone, I don't know, but I don't really recognize her from anything else. And apparently she was in the movie Ronin with Robert De Niro, which I have seen, but it's been a long time. We even see young Meryl walk up and try and distract Truman by falling over on him, and she introduces herself really forcefully. He ends up taking Meryl to the school dance where young Marlon also is, and I have so many things to point out about this dance. So it's unclear what decade this is supposed to take place in. You can kind of guess it might be like the 70s probably. But the song playing by the band at the dance sounds like a 1950s style rock song, but it's actually a cover of the song 20th Century Boy by T-Rex, which didn't come out until 1973. And I checked this. That song was indeed an original. It wasn't like they covered it and just really made it their own. And that original version also sounds very definitively not 50s-ish at all, and very much evokes an early 70s rock sound. So it's not really clear, because I guess my annoyance here is that if this flashback is set in the 70s or 80s, and this dance is 50s themed, why the hell would they go with a song from 1973 performed in the style of 50s rock instead of just choosing a regular 50s rock song, unless this is somehow deliberate and I'm not understanding why? Truman spots the mystery girl from earlier, the one that he spotted by the tree, and they were making eyes at each other before Meryl interrupted. And she's on the dance floor too, and the two of them keep locking eyes from across the room, but not actually talking to each other. But it seems like the people around her seemingly usher her away from Truman, and even completely off the dance floor, and he doesn't know what's going on and keeps looking over to see where she went. And if I'm not explaining this well enough, the reason all of this is happening is that the script, or the plan for the show had him winding up with Meryl, clearly, and this mystery woman is going off script, so all the so-called extras are running interference to prevent her from disrupting the flow of the script, because if she screws it up, it's very hard to correct. And I would probably think that they would probably just remove her. You know what I mean? If she doesn't actually have a part to play in this, why couldn't they just replace her if they already have a bad feeling about her, but they don't? It cuts to later that night when Truman's still in high school and he's in the library where Meryl and Marlon are trying to convince him that he has studied enough and that maybe he should have some fun with them, but he's intent to continue studying because he has like an exam the next day or something. The two of them finally leave him to his schoolwork and he spots a woman's hands between the books on a shelf in front of him and he stands up to see who it is. And of course, it's this mystery woman, but somehow she looks more familiar than she did before, although I still can't really place her. But maybe I just know her from that 1998 movie, The Truman Show with Jim Carrey or something, which has happened to me before, where I really only know them from the movie I'm watching and I just can't remember. He greets her by saying hi at first, and then he looks down and sees her books on Japanese and says konnichiwa, and he confirms that her name is Lauren Garland, as she has some sort of name tag printed out from a label maker on the desk where she's working. So it's very important to note that Lauren Garland is the name that Truman asked for when he made that secret phone call very early on in the movie to Fiji. He introduces himself to her and she says she knows who he is, but she's not supposed to talk to him. And he pretends that he takes that. I don't know if he's actually pretending. It's like he seems to think more like that means that her parents don't want her getting involved with boys at school or something just yet, even though she's probably old enough for that. But some parents are really uptight about that. So she looks around very nervously and he asks her if she has a boyfriend and she says, no, it's not that. And then he asks her if it has to do with Meryl, but she says it's not that either. He then asks her if he's just not her type, and again she says no, and he notices her pin on her sweater and it says, how's it going to end? And he says he's been wondering that himself. He tries to ask her out and throws out a number of days that they could go on a date together, but she writes the word now on her notepad and shows it to him, and he points out that they have finals tomorrow, and so he clearly doesn't think tonight's the best day, but she says that if they don't go now, it won't ever happen, and she asks him what he wants to do, and he just looks at her with so much hope in his eyes, and it shows them running off together into the night, and they make their way to the beach, and they're both very happy seeming together, just running around. She explains to him that there's not much time and that they're going to be there any minute, but he doesn't know what she means by that or who they would be. She says that they don't want her talking to him, and he just says, then don't talk, and he kisses her, which is a fucking sick move, honestly. But suddenly a car races down onto the beach, and she immediately begins pleading with him that everyone knows everything he does and that her name isn't Lauren, it's Sylvia. The car comes to a stop right behind them on the beach, and the man driving gets out, and Truman asks who he is. He claims to be Lauren's father and tries to take her away despite her claiming that she's never ever seen him before. She fights with the guy and she yells out to Truman that it's all fake and it's all for him. The sky and the sea, everything, it's all a set. But obviously it would seem like this might be enough for him to piece together what's going on. But honestly, if you had lived for almost 2 decades and then one day somebody just showed up and told you this with this phrasing, would you actually believe what they were saying and take it at face value, or would it sound like nonsensical ramblings? And then the man claiming to be her dad gets her in the car and explains to Truman that they've tried everything with his daughter, including electroshock therapy, and that Truman's not the first one that she's done this to. Sylvia pleads with him that the dad is lying to Truman, but the dad then declares that they're moving away to Fiji and he'll never see them again. Truman goes over and picks up Sylvia's sweater that she left on the beach, and he looks back in confusion as the car just drives away. It cuts back to the two female viewers, and the unfamiliar one, the one that doesn't know the show that well, I mean, is confused as to why Truman never went after Sylvia, but the other one explains that his mother ended up getting very sick right after that, and he was too kind to just up and leave his mother in that state. What I also find weird is that I guess we're to gather that the show is constantly on and people can just tune in whenever, and it's just a live feed of his life, but I don't buy that this would be a good way to do the show in order for it to actually become successful. They would have been better off recording him constantly, but ultimately condensing it down to like 1 hour episodes and editing all the monotony out, because it would be so boring to just sit and watch it and you never know when anything good was actually going to happen. Like, how long would you sit for before you actually saw something worth watching? Back with Truman in the basement, this is the end of the flashback that it ended with him, losing Sylvia on the beach, basically, like her supposed father driving away with her. He pulls out a picture frame and removes the back of it, and hidden there, we see a working picture of Sylvia's face made out of a Mod Podge of magazine cutouts. He takes the pictures of the eyes that he removed from the magazine at work and tries the different sets of eyes that he has ripped out to see what looks most like hers. The next day, when Truman is driving to work, we see him through the hidden camera in his car, and his radio seems like it's malfunctioning and he can't figure out what's wrong with it. Then as the radio seemingly stops malfunctioning, we hear what sounds like somebody driving on a two-way or talking on a two-way radio instead of an actual radio broadcast. And we can hear what is clearly someone who works for the show coordinating people so that they know where Truman will be and how far away he is. And although to us it's clearly a member of the crew of the show talking about Truman, that's not immediately obvious to him as he hears it on his car radio. But he does get a sense that something fishy is going on as he notices that he's turning onto the same street as the voice on the two-way radio says that he is. But suddenly Truman almost hits someone on the street and a very high-pitched radio tuning sound kicks in, and the radio broadcast comes back on with an apology for the interruption, and they dismiss it as an accidental getting on a police frequency or something. Truman gets out of the car and walks by a man who's reading a newspaper with a front page story about cracking down on the homeless with a picture from the day that Truman's dad was taken away. When Truman goes to enter work through a revolving door, it seems like he's having some sort of realization, and instead of actually going inside, he keeps following the door around and goes back outside, and he continues walking and carrying his briefcase, and it's clear someone is watching him through their side view mirror, but we don't see them, and they even electrically adjust the mirror to follow him across the street. He ends up at some kind of outdoor eatery and is just watching people around him, but he suddenly gets up and leaves and walks right in front of a bus, but it stops before it hits him. Then he holds his arm out toward the driver of the bus and walks farther across the street and holds his arm out toward another driver who stops, and it's like he realizes that maybe people are a little too cognizant of his presence and it doesn't actually make sense that they would be. Then he suddenly runs into a nearby building, and security guards nearby notice him as he attempts to get on an elevator, but he misses it, and the guards begin radioing, and one of them asks him if they can help him, and he says that he has an appointment at Gable Enterprises, and the guard says that they went bust, but Truman goes to get on the elevator when it opens anyway, but he notices when he looks inside that it's no longer the inside of an elevator, and he can see a craft service table and people scrambling to conceal themselves. FYI, a craft service table is just a table full of snacks and drinks for actors and crew members on the set of a movie or TV show. He just looks at the table and is completely perplexed by it, but the guards drag him away and throw him out of the building as he walks away, and he walks away, and he starts messing with people, and no one really gives him much of a reaction, which is also not normal, and he seems to realize that. Finally, he finds Marlon, who is stocking a vending machine, and he tells him he really needs to talk to him, but Marlon says he doesn't have time because he's way behind on his work. Then he proceeds to tell Truman that he looks like shit and wants to know if he's okay. And Truman tries to explain some of the things that have been going on, but Marlon doesn't really take them seriously. Truman tries to get Marlon to come with him so he can really talk to him, but Marlon tells him he has to work, but Truman starts to get very persistent with him about it. The two of them wind up on a beach at sunset talking, and Truman explains that it feels like his life has been building towards something, and maybe that something is now happening. He asks Marlon about the farthest he's ever gone away from the island of Sea Haven, and he explains that a previous job took him all over the place, but he never found anywhere as beautiful as this. Truman then turns to Marlon and says just between the two of them, he plans on going away for a while, and Marlon clearly tries not to react too much to that. Then it cuts to Truman at his mother's house looking through photo albums with her and Meryl, and he's clearly on edge with everything that's going on. Like, he's very suspicious at this point that his theories that he hasn't really voiced out loud are real. And it seems like as he's looking through this photo album, every time he tries to question anything, the two women quickly nip his curiosity in the bud. He offers to take his mother home, but Meryl is insistent that she take her because the two of them need to discuss his upcoming birthday. And she also mentions that Truman's favorite show is going on. Boy, I'm just going to take a little aside here and say people really fucking got pissy with me on the internet about my fucking take on birthdays and male birthdays being more meaningless as you get older and blah, blah, blah. A lot of people really did not care for my take, and I don't really give a shit. I'm going to double down on it right now and say, yep, I still believe that. I don't care. But as they leave, he thumbs back through the photo albums to his and Meryl's wedding, and when he spots the ring on her finger and the way she's holding her fingers, he has this like huge reaction to it, but we don't really know why he's reacting, or at least I didn't put it together why he was reacting so much. Then it cuts to the next time that he and Meryl are home together, like the next morning maybe, and she's in her nurse uniform, and he tells her that he needs to go outside with her and talk to her, but she says that she's running late for work, and he asks her what the rush is, and she says that she has to get to surgery because there was this elevator accident in the building near where he works, and it's clearly like trying to explain what he saw when he went in that building and there was nothing in the elevator. He says that he'll cross his fingers for her on the surgery, and she has a very clear reaction to it. It's like he's hinting that he knows something, and she might not exactly put it together, but she knows there's something off. And I guess what we're supposed to get from the wedding photo was that she was actually crossing her fingers while she was marrying him because she knew the whole thing was a sham. I had to Google this because I always remember crossing your fingers being a thing when I was a kid if you were lying or something, but it occurs to me that I never actually knew why that was a thing. According to Google, people cross their fingers when they're lying or breaking a promise as a superstitious, symbolic act to protect themselves from divine punishment or guilt. Historically, this gesture, often made behind the back, is rooted in early Christian traditions of invoking the cross for protection, essentially asking for forgiveness while uttering a falsehood. The practice likely originated with Christians who were forced to deny their faith under the threat of persecution. Meryl finally reluctantly heads off to work, and Truman rushes back through the house to watch her ride away on her bike, and he sneakily grabs his own bike to go after her. When he arrives at the hospital, a nurse tells him that he cannot see his wife because she's in pre-op and it would be impossible because that's a sterile environment in there. He asks the nurse to give his wife a message that he's going to Fiji and he will call her when he gets there. And of course, the nurse gets very nervous when he says this. But then, just as he sees the nurse scamper away, he sneaks after her, and many of the patients and staff try and create obstacles for him as he makes his way back toward the operating room. But he finally arrives there and sees Meryl in surgery after a group of actors clearly scrambled to create a surgical scene for Truman. And it just seems like they would have been so woefully underprepared to do that. He manages to watch until the doctor goes for like an incision with a scalpel, and the patient jerks up immediately when he makes contact with them. But suddenly a security guard comes and takes Truman away and tells him that only family members of the patient can be back there. And the next thing we know, Truman is at a travel agency and he's wearing one of those Peaky Blinders hats, but it's brighter and multicolored plaid. And I'll tell you, I can never remember what those hats are actually called. Even when I looked it up, I got about 10 different names to choose from, including a newsboy cap, a baker boy cap, an 8-panel cap, and a Shelby cap. But I guess Killian Murphy's character's name in Peaky Blinders is Thomas Shelby, so that's where that one probably comes from. Truman informs the travel agent that he wants to go to Fiji and that he would like to leave today if he can, but when she goes to look up flights on her computer, she claims that she doesn't have anything for at least a month. And he finds this hard to believe, of course, but she says that it's the busy season, and she asks him if he would like to book the flight that is a month out, and he says that he'll just have to make other arrangements. He ends up managing to get a bus ticket to Chicago, and everyone's giving each other looks behind his back, obviously, because when things don't go to plan, it's very tough for them to improvise that quickly and easily. The bus driver goes to shift the bus and deliberately grinds the gears severely and explains that there must be a malfunction, and it's announced that everyone will have to get off the bus, and all of the passengers get out like they're getting off this bus way too easily, way too quickly, which makes sense because all of them knew that they had to get off the bus and they didn't think they were actually going anywhere. But in real life, this would have taken like 10 to 15 minutes to get everyone to shuffle off this bus, gather all their shit after they just got settled in. Like they weren't expecting to have to get up and they would be in disbelief for a minute. But when the bus driver goes to look back at the empty bus, he sees that Truman is still in his seat in the back and apologizes to him. And it cuts to the bar where the two female viewers were before. You know, there's the one that seems to be familiar with the show and the other one that doesn't know the show that well. And more of the people that are there are talking about what's going on in the show, and some of them are confused, but the same server who seemed to know the show best knows that Truman must go back to talk to Meryl, and Meryl comes home on her bike to find that Truman is sitting in his car in silence in the driveway, and she opens the door and asks him if he's okay, and he tells her to get in and be quiet. He explains to her that in his rearview mirror in a few moments, a woman will ride by one way on a bike and a man will walk by the other way with flowers, followed by a dented Volkswagen Beetle, and Meryl tries to be dismissive about this, but almost immediately it happens, and the two people walk by behind them, and after a brief delay, the Beetle drives by, and he explains to her that he knew that that was going to happen because they appear to be on some sort of loop. As he explains to her that it just keeps happening over and over again, Meryl tries to deflect by explaining that she invited Marlon and his wife over for a barbecue on Sunday. He tells her that she's not listening to him, and she asks him if he's upset about the trip to Fiji, and she explains that if he wants to go, he should just go, but he should wait and save up for a couple of months first. Then, as she goes to get out of the car, he suddenly locks the doors and tells her he wants to go now, and he very recklessly backs out of the driveway and begins driving away with her very erratically. And it's pretty clear that she's very on edge, and he announces that since he can't drive to Fiji, he'll have to drive to Atlantic City, despite the fact that he hates gambling. But suddenly, just as he's about to head out of town, they run into this random traffic jam, and he points out how coincidental or even well synchronized everyone is for this to have happened just then when they were trying to go this way. Meryl declares that they should go home, and Truman enthusiastically agrees and backs up very quickly from the traffic jam. But when he turns around, he doesn't make the turn to go to their house and returns back the way they came from. I think he goes through a roundabout to do that, but he says now he wants to go to New Orleans. Why did I say that so fucking? New Orleans, because they can't drive to Fiji, like he said. And he points out that now all of a sudden the traffic jam is gone from where it was before, despite it being there moments ago. And Meryl says that he's not right in the head and she wants to be let out of the car. But once they make it to the bridge, he stops the car, and Meryl explains that he should have known this was going to happen because he has a fear of going over the water. And now, honestly, everything makes way more sense. It's like they scripted the whole death of his dad in the water to implant this irrational fear of the water in him so he would never be able to leave in his mind. So that also explains why he was being so weird when he was supposed to get on the ferry earlier. Meryl tells him that they should just go back, but he tells her to drive, and he slams on the gas, and she attempts to steer for him as they cross the bridge, and they're so excited when they finally make it over. And just as they get across, they see a sign warning about dangerous forest fires, and some pyrotechnics ignite and a fire starts across the road, but Truman just drives through it. So they also run into a smoke screen that the car has to drive through, and they finally make their way into the clear air on the other side. And this is all clearly set up to prevent Truman from getting through it. You know, they don't want him to get out of Sea Haven. Meryl asks him what they'll do for money when they get to New Orleans, and he explains that he has his bank card, and she acts bothered by the notion that they would eat into their savings like that. And she explains that she'll have to call his mother when they get there, but they suddenly start to hear sirens, and Truman frustratedly asks what it is now, and it's revealed that there's some kind of issue at the nuclear power plant, and everyone is being evacuated, and they stop to ask a police officer if there's a way around, but he says no. Truman thanks him for his help, and the officer says, "No problem, Truman," and Truman immediately realizes that this doesn't make any sense because the officer knows his name and he clearly doesn't know the officer. Truman suddenly rushes out of the car and through the crowds of people, and suddenly men in hazmat suits crowd around him, trying to stop him from running any farther. They finally tackle him to the ground and hold him down, and next thing we know, Meryl is thanking two officers at their front door for their help, like they clearly brought him back home. And they explain to her that the next time it happens, they'll have to press charges against Truman. She comes into the kitchen, and Truman is sitting at the table, and she mentions that he's not well, and he suddenly turns to her and asks why she wants to have a baby with him because she clearly hates him. And she immediately says that's not true, and she desperately grabs something off the counter, which is a bag of drink mix, and she says, "Why don't you try some new Mococo drink? Fresh from the slopes of Mount Nicaragua with no artificial sweeteners." But Truman just looks at her in complete confusion and asks her what she's talking about and who she's even talking to. And she even continues trying to do the ad, and he asks her what that has to do with anything. And we keep seeing Truman through a hidden camera on Meryl's person somewhere, like a lapel, like hidden in a button maybe or something. And he accuses her of being part of whatever's going on. And she grabs the knife that she advertised in the beginning and claims that he's having a nervous breakdown and he's scaring her. And he suddenly grabs her and wrestles the knife away from her. And she cries out, "Do something," but it's clearly directed at the crew of the show. Then she tries to run away from him as he asks her who she was talking to. And suddenly they reach the front of the house, and Marlon lets himself in with a 6-pack of beer because this is kind of like a thing. Like, obviously they've got to like coordinate something to have an intervention if something like this is happening. And so Marlon's acting like, "Oh, I'm just coming over with a 6-pack and we're going to hang out." Meryl begins crying in Marlon's arms out of supposed fear of Truman, and Marlon asks Truman what's going on in a very judgy way. We see Meryl crying out and trying to pretend like she's just a wife under duress, but in reality, she's an actress in unstable working conditions, and she claims that she can't carry on in these unprofessional events that are going on. We see Marlon and Truman talking as they sit at the edge of a dock of some sort, and Truman explains to Marlon that he can't understand why, but it seems like the world revolves around him somehow. Marlon tries to diffuse the thought by suggesting that Truman might be just wishing he had made more of himself or something, but Truman explains that it seems like everybody is in on it, and Marlon again minimizes that thought by saying that the two of them have been friends since they were 7, and they cheated off of each other's test papers to make it through school. The two of them reminisce a bit about their childhoods, and Marlon says that Truman is the closest thing he's ever had to a brother, and he knows things haven't worked out with either of them like they used to dream they would. And he basically posits the idea that Truman is looking for answers and starting to believe or see things that are not real to try and make up for everything. Then we see in the control room for the show that Christoph is feeding lines to Marlon as they're sitting there talking through an earpiece in this heartfelt moment. And he even has Marlon say that he would never lie to Truman. And he says that if everybody was in on it, he would have to be in on it too. And you see a look in Truman's eyes like he might actually be realizing that Marlon probably is in on it as well. But Marlon claims that there is no it to be in on at all. But he clarifies to him that Truman was right about one thing, which is the thing that started all this. The two of them turn around and look and see a man approaching, and it's heavily implied that it's going to be Truman's father, still alive. And Marlon says that he must have a hell of a story to tell. Truman walks up and approaches him as he appears to be coming across the bridge that goes out of town, and we see more of Christoph heavily directing the entire process, and home audiences are watching in anticipation of what will happen. He dials up the emotions as Truman finally hugs his dad, and his dad tells him that he will have to make up all the lost years to him. And Christoph feels as though this entire event is a triumph as home audiences are very emotional and celebrating the moment. The entire crew in the control room, including Paul Giamatti as Simeon, is basically openly celebrating now, and Christoph goes to leave the room in delight as he's congratulated by one of the executives who comes in. See, that's Philip Baker Hall, but they barely really acknowledge his character, and I don't know if maybe he had a bigger part and scenes were cut or something. No idea. It shows Sylvia, who is watching in disdain at home, as she clearly knows that everything going on is so scripted and forced. The moment is a major shift in the setting of the entire movie, like for a bit, as we get a little more explanation and backstory of things, as it finally shows how advertising driven the moments are for viewers, as we see Sylvia's TV screen, and it shows a sequence that basically details the history of the show, starting with the viewership of over 1 billion people for The Birth of Truman. And I just don't know that I buy that many people would be that excited, because they wouldn't be invested in it at all. They talk about how his first steps and they were shown on TV, and they even reference the kiss that he had with Sylvia on the beach, and it explains that technology improved over the years since he was born, and it explains that the show was really on 24/7, but they explain that the dome where Sea Haven is located is the largest set ever built and can be seen from space, and it's portrayed as somehow being built directly behind the Hollywood sign in California, even though that makes no logical sense to choose that location. I mean, think about it. Think about how expensive California is. Why would you build this dome behind the Hollywood sign? That would be the most expensive real estate to purchase and then demolish so you could build this town. Why wouldn't you build it in the middle of fucking nowhere, far away from Los Angeles enough that it wouldn't be too far, but you could do it more cheaply? Because it seems like that would be ridiculous as a cost for the show. So the narrative again switches over to being conducted through a TV show that discusses the Truman Show, called True Talk, with host Mike Michelson, who is played by Harry Shearer, as I mentioned, who has regularly voiced a ton of Simpsons characters forever. And he's interviewing Christoph remotely, and he points out that Truman's father, Kirk, has attempted to infiltrate the show on multiple occasions previously since he was killed off. Mike points out to Christoph that there have been many previous attempts by a variety of people to get into the show and reveal what it all really is to Truman, including a time where a man hid in a Christmas present and tried to suddenly spoil what was going on to young Truman when the present was opened. Like, he just popped out of the box. And they show behind the scenes footage that Kirk's appearance when Truman encountered him on the street that we saw, and how he somehow parachuted into the area where Truman was before that moment occurred. It's not clear like how people are getting in and out of this dome, you know? I mean, where are they going? It's got to be pretty complicated to get in and out, I would think. We also see a moment where Truman was a child and had to be stopped by Kirk from climbing up a giant mountain of rocks that clearly led to an area outside of the staged Sea Haven set. In another time, Truman is in class when he's maybe 10 years old, probably not even that, and proclaims to his teacher that he wants to be an explorer like Magellan, but his teacher pulls down a world map and explains to him that there's really not much left to explore or discover in the world, and it's all just kind of affirming the fact that Truman has always wanted to travel, and it created great difficulty for the cast and crew of the show to curb his curiosity about the world outside of Sea Haven. They even used dogs to try and scare him away from his considerations about leaving leaving there from a very young age. And Christoph explains that after they trialed those few things, he came up with the idea of having Truman's father, Kirk, drown in order to traumatize him and fear the water to the maximum. But he also explains that the actor who played Kirk was very dismayed when he read the script where his character was being killed off, and that discontent within him caused him to later break back onto the set and try to interrupt Truman's life. Viewers start calling in to ask Christoph questions, and he explains that there are an estimated 5,000 plus cameras on the island used to film the show, and they also reveal that his 2-week premature birth is what spurred them to choose him as a baby to be the subject of the show. And they say he was in competition with 5 other unwanted children who just happened to end up being born after him. He was the first child to be legally adopted by a corporation, and we see the bizarre techniques they used from when he was born, like putting a camera in his mobile in his crib. Mike points out that the show has generated a revenue that is comparable to the gross national product of a small country. And Christoph points out that it takes the population of a small country to actually keep the show going. Gross national product is the amount of revenue produced by a country's residents and companies, regardless of whether the revenue is generated on the soil of the country or abroad. But the more often talked about gross domestic product it's a lot more of an indication, because this is it's frequently abbreviated as GDP, and it's the total monetary value of all goods and services produced within a country in a given time period, usually over the course of a year or a quarter of a year. GDP serves as a comprehensive scorecard of a nation's economic health, measuring output from consumption, investment, and government spending, along with net exports, but it does not include the revenue generated by citizens of the country outside of the country itself, which is the key distinction between gross national product and gross domestic product. So it also includes non-citizens that are producing within that country. Mike also points out that the revenue stream for the show comes from the product placement advertising on the show itself, and Christoph explains that everything on the show is actually for sale. This includes wardrobes, food products, domestic goods, the homes that people live in on the show, and everything else within reason. Mike asks why it has taken so long for Truman to come close to discovering the true nature of the world around him, and Christoph explains that humans typically accept what they are presented with, essentially pointing out that Truman has never known any different, so it took him a long time to realize anything was amiss. Sylvia calls into the show anonymously and accuses Christoph of being a liar and a manipulator, and she says that what he's done to Truman is sick, but Christoph immediately recognizes her voice and refuses to let Mike hang up on her, and he tells her that she barely knows Truman, despite the fact that she thinks she knows what's best for him. But she tells him that he has no right to take an innocent baby and turn his life into a mockery. But Christoph asserts that he has given Truman a chance to lead a normal life, I guess. And he says that the real world is a terrible place full of sickos, and Sea Haven is the way the world should actually be. But she tells him that Truman is simply a prisoner and he's not a performer like the people around him. And Christoph justifies this by saying that Truman can leave at any time, even though that's clearly not the case. We've already seen how much they go to be able to prevent him from leaving. He says the only reason he hasn't left is because his dreams are just fleeting and unspecific enough that it's not justifiable for him to go, and that there's nothing stopping him from getting away, which is obviously still completely untrue based on everything we know, because he hasn't even been provided with an understanding of what's even going on. Christoph tells her that it just bothers her that Truman prefers his cell, as he calls it, but she tells him that's not true. They decide to close out his interview after Sylvia's call, and Christoph reveals that Meryl will soon be leaving Truman in an upcoming episode, and they will introduce a new love interest. And he asserts that they still intend to portray the first televised conception of a child through the program. They essentially state that Sylvia's voice is that of a minority of viewers in the show, and that it's otherwise been positively received by audiences. The next morning, Truman wakes up and is getting ready in the bathroom, and he really freaks out some of the control room technicians, as it seems like maybe he realizes there's a camera in his medicine cabinet. And just as the technicians are about to call Christoph about it, they're relieved to find that Truman is seemingly just joking around again in the mirror as he declares himself Trumania of the Burbank galaxy. The technicians proclaim that he's back to his old self again, and we see him walk outside and greet his neighbors, much like he did in the beginning of the movie. He goes through the same old motions, like where the neighbor's dog Pluto jumps on him and people stop him on the street, but it seems like he's deliberately playing into it and pretending it's all normal on purpose, like nothing he's doing rings true. Then as he's hamming it up on a call at work, he's introduced to a new coworker who is stunningly attractive and is clearly meant to be his new love interest after Meryl eventually leaves him. Her name is Vivian and is played by Heidi Shans. I have seen movies that have had her in them before, but I hadn't really recognized her here when I saw her. Like, she was in the movie Seven with Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman, which I enjoy, and she was in Virtuosity with Russell Crowe and Denzel Washington and a few other things, but it seems like she actually stopped acting completely when she would have been in her early 30s, but she doesn't even have a Wikipedia page, and Google just says that she retired and left the entertainment industry in 2003. It's revealed that Vivian will be neighbors with Truman at work now, and he returns to his phone call while he continues to awkwardly look over at her. After that, it cuts to the control room, and Paul Giamatti's character Simeon is giving instruction on which cameras to switch to, and Christoph walks in the room and almost immediately asks why it appears like Truman is sleeping in the basement. But Simeon clarifies that Truman moved down there when Meryl left him, but this angers Christoph because all unusual behavior like this is supposed to be reported to him immediately. But Simeon explains that although the camera angles are not great, he didn't think it was that big of a deal because he was just sleeping down there and that was it. Christoph says that he wants to go through an insurance convention that is planned for the next day with Simeon, but he notices something on the camera feed and tells them to isolate the audio, and when they do, we can hear him snoring. But although you can see what appears to be Truman's body laying and sleeping, you can't see his face or even be sure it's him, and Christoph thinks something is up, so he instructs someone else in the room to call Truman and pretend to be a wrong number. The phone starts ringing, but the body doesn't move in reaction at all, like when the phone starts, and Christoph has Simeon go back through the footage leading up to him settling in the basement, and they notice that he clearly staged something to make it look like he was sleeping, but in reality they can see when they enhance the footage and look at another part of the room that he was actually sneaking out of the basement. They send Marlon over to his house with a six-pack to check on Truman, but all he finds in the basement is an inflatable snowman or something covered in a blanket and a tape recorder of someone snoring. Christoph instructs Marlon through an earpiece to search the house for Truman because he believes he must still be in there somehow, and Marlon does, and it's like he does all he can to appear friendly and playful as he searches for Truman. And then Marlon suddenly finds a small hidden room, like a closet with a stepladder in it, with a hole in the ceiling that Truman clearly escaped out of onto the lawn outside. And Christoph begins rapidly cycling through the different cameras to see if he can find him. But when Marlon declares that Truman is gone, Christoph orders the crew in the control room to cut transmission, and when they're shocked at this, to say the least, because that's never happened, and viewers are dumbfounded to see the show get turned off without warning like this. So there's a panic at the station, and Simeon assures Christoph that Truman couldn't simply disappear, given how recognizable he is. They have the whole town band together and begin searching for Truman, and they use the lighthouse and large groups of people, including Truman's mother, locking arms and walking the streets in the night searching for him. Everyone is convinced they're bound to find him in due time, but they get increasingly frustrated when he really doesn't turn up anywhere. And in a moment of desperation, Christoph has the crew turn on the sun and it lights everything up, and he points out that they're getting the best ratings they've ever had at the moment, despite it seeming like what they're doing is irreparably damaging the narrative of the show. Then Simeon has everyone go back to what is called their first position, which is, I guess, their primary starting location in Sea Haven. Kristoff points out that they need to keep an eye on the sea because they know he is likely to be trying to leave, and they spot him out on the water in a sailboat eventually. Everyone is flabbergasted that he would go out on the water in a sailboat, given how much he has to be fearful for based on his history. We see him on the boat in a captain's hat, and he pulls out the makeshift picture of Sylvia made from magazine clippings. And as Kristoff tries to coordinate people to intervene and stop him, it's pointed out to him that everyone is just acting and no one really knows how to do anything because they've never even had to operate the ferry or anything themselves. No one can figure out how to stop him, and Kristoff gives Simeon a nonverbal cue, which Simeon takes to mean that he needs to initiate some sort of weather phenomenon by localizing a storm over the boat. The rain starts coming down hard, and Truman struggles with the boat, and Kristoff orders that they send lightning strikes, and one hits the mast of the boat, and Truman falls out into the water. The executive tries to tell Kristoff that they can't kill Truman on live TV, and Kristoff asserts that he was born on live TV, so it's not out of the question. But Truman manages to get back up into the boat and says, "Is that the best you can do? You're going to have to kill me," which Kristoff takes as a personal challenge and instructs Simeon to attempt to capsize the boat. But everyone else is opposed to Kristoff in the moment and doesn't want to kill Truman. And suddenly Kristoff reaches over Simeon and hits a command on his computer that causes a huge wave to hit Truman and capsize the boat. But afterward, you can see that Truman survived and the boat is back upright and he's in bad shape, but the sun has come out and he extends the sail again. Then, as he seems to have recovered and looks much better, he's slowly sailing away until his bowsprit, which is the giant wooden rod extending from the front of the boat, collides with the wall of the dome and it stops the boat in its tracks or in its path. Truman climbs up to the front and reaches out and touches the wall and can't seem to believe it's actually true. Then he begins pounding on the wall to no avail and is very emotional, but he's able to climb out and walk along the wall where the water is shallow until he finds a staircase which he climbs to the top of. He reaches for a door at the top of the stairs, and Kristoff uses the dome PA system to talk to Truman like he's God before he leaves. Truman asks who he is, and Kristoff explains that he's a creator of a television show that gives hope and joy and inspiration to millions. And he explains to Truman that he's the star of that television show, and Truman asks if nothing was real. But Kristoff explains that he was real, and he says that that's what made him as good to watch as he was. Truman turns to walk through the door, and Kristoff explains to him that there is no more truth out there than there is in the world that he created for him. He just says that out there is just more of the same lies and deceit, and he assures him that in his world, he has nothing to fear, and he assures Truman that he knows Truman better than Truman knows himself. But Truman proclaims that they never had a camera in his head, and Kristoff asserts that Truman is afraid, and that's why he can't leave. He explains that he has watched Truman through every stage of his life and that he can't leave because he belongs there with him. All the while, Sylvia is watching and hoping that Truman will take the plunge and leave the horrid place. Kristoff pleads with him to at least say something in response because he's on television, for fuck's sake, but Truman just turns around and smiles and says, "In case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night," and does a fake smile and walks out the door, much like he did to the couple when you first see him go outside in the beginning, and then he does that again later too. Sylvia does a fangirl yelp in excitement as Truman leaves, and she runs out of her apartment, presumably to go meet him. As all of the crowds at the bars and other people watching are celebrating the triumphant ending, all we can see is the flight of stairs and the door at the top of them, and Kristoff orders Simeon to cut the transmission, and the broadcast cuts out. And those two security guards that were complaining about how you never see anything for the sex scenes, and they've been watching in the booth throughout throughout, like they keep showing them. They just look at each other and say they should see what else is on, and they just return to channel surfing, and we roll credits. So, trivia for this movie: Ed Harris and Jim Carrey never actually met during filming of this movie. The original script had Truman Burbank living in a recreation of New York City, but Peter Weir changed it to an idyllic town to make the movie feel less sci-fi, which that actually makes sense, because if you take something that you're already familiar with and know it exists, and then you try and make it different, it's going to seem very science fictional. The Trumania bit, where Truman draws on the mirror with soap and acts strange, was completely improvised by Jim Carrey. In another take, he drew long curly hair and a dress. The old ladies who watch the show wear the same robe as Meryl because, like they said, everything in The Truman Show is for sale. Jim Carrey and Peter Weir initially found working together on set difficult because Carrey's contract gave him the power to demand rewrites, but Weir was so impressed with Carrey's improvisational skills, and the two became more interactive over time, which is what a sweet story. Like, they became more interactive over time. Peter Weir wrote a 10-page backstory that described the history of the show. For instance, The Truman Show was a frequent winner at the Emmys. Truman was supposed to be just out of high school, but since Jim Carrey was in his 30s, it got swapped from teenage angst to more of a midlife crisis. The film is studied in media ethics courses, particularly focusing on the characters of creator Christoph, best friend Marlon, and the prostituting of Truman's wife, Meryl. According to a 2008 New York Times article, psychologists in Britain and the US reported a number of people experiencing Truman syndrome, or the Truman Show delusion, the belief that they are the unwitting star of their own reality TV show. Reportedly, many afflicted specifically mentioned the film in therapy. More recently, on September 16, 2013, the detailed account of one Ohio student who suffered from years of the Truman Show delusion was documented in the New Yorker magazine article Unreality Star by Andrew Morantz. In a deleted scene, Truman runs into a jogger played by the same actor who played a homeless man in a wheelchair 2 days earlier. The iconic poster, a rendition of Jim Carrey's face comprising hundreds of individual images, was created by artist Rob Silverman at a rumored cost of $75,000. The overall look was influenced by television images, particularly commercials. Many shots have characters leaning into the lens with their eyeballs wide open, and the interior scenes are heavily lit because Weir wanted to remind viewers that in this world, everything was for sale. People on the set were forbidden from uttering phrases from Jim Carrey's past quote-unquote silly movies. All right, so IMDb nuggets. Like I say, these are just stupid things I found in IMDb trivia. A possible Easter egg: there is a bowl of 1-inch green gel pellets of soap in the visible forefront of the guy in the bathtub who's watching The Truman Show. They are very similar looking pellets that were a key point in the plot of The Rock from 1996, which also stars Ed Harris. I don't know that I buy that was intentional. It could be. I might be wrong. I just don't know that I buy it. The name Christoph means he who holds Christ in his heart, making Truman the Son of God. Wow, that's a reach. Okay. On to info and ratings. Opening weekend, 31.5 million. Worldwide gross, 264.1 million. IMDb rating 8.2, Letterboxd rating 4.2, Rotten Tomato critic score 94%, Rotten Tomato audience score 89%. Personal rating 5 out of 5 stars. Praise for this movie. I liked this movie so much better this time around because I think the only prior time I watched this was shortly after it came out on video in what would have probably been the late 90s. And I don't think I was old enough to appreciate it for what it was. But it is so well made and so compelling to watch and has countless incredible moments in it. I love the commentary and the satire, and I think that Jim Carrey's performance is among the best of his career, and this was his first big dramatic role, so he really brought it. Criticism: I hate having to suspend so much disbelief in the premise. It's like, I just don't think the cost of production would offset enough or be offset enough by ad revenue. And I still think that a 24-hour broadcast would make it unwatchable. So, I mean, I don't think that if you were watching it on any given day, anytime you tuned in, you don't know if anything worthwhile is going to happen for hours at a time. Like, really? And I don't really think for that reason that it would ever actually take off. All right, everyone. Thank you for stopping by. I do appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day. Bye now.
I'm here to welcome you to Brandon at Random Reviews. No method when I choose. It's Brandon at Random Reviews. What you hope to and see, he's half blind with half tied. With all the dates of release for Footloose.